The arena roared with 10,000 voices, all of them hungry for blood. Seraphine stumbled as the guards shoved her through the iron gates, her bare feet scraping against sand still damp from the last contestant's defeat. Above her, the obsidian walls of the crucible rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, packed with spectators whose faces blurred into a single mask of cruel anticipation. "Move, Omega." The guard's boot connected with her spine, sending her sprawling face first into the arena floor. Seraphine tasted copper and grit. Her wrists burned where the silver-laced rope had rubbed them raw during the 3-day journey from the Thornwood Pack compound. She pushed herself to her knees, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crawl. From the royal pavilion at the arena's highest point, a horn sounded. 3 notes, deep and resonant, silencing the crowd instantly. Seraphine's breath faltered. She knew what those notes meant. Every wolf in the 5 kingdoms knew. The Alpha King was present. "Citizens of Valdrin." The announcer's voice carried across the arena with supernatural clarity. "His Majesty, Kaelin Blackmore, Alpha King of the 5 kingdoms, honors us with his presence for this month's crucible." Seraphine lifted her gaze toward the pavilion, squinting against the afternoon sun. She could just make out a figure seated on a throne of blackened iron, surrounded by guards in crimson cloaks. The Alpha King. The ruler who had inherited this barbaric tradition from his father and, according to whispers, had been searching for a way to end it ever since. "Today's offering," the announcer continued with theatrical relish, "comes to us from the Thornwood Pack, a defective Omega who failed to shift at her awakening. Who has been a burden to her pack for all her life, who was graciously given to the crucible by her own alpha rather than wasting pack resources." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Seraphine's jaw tightened. Graciously given. As if Victor Thornwood hadn't been waiting for any excuse to dispose of her since the day she was born. She will face the traditional trial, survive until sunset, and she earns the right to live as a packless wanderer. Fall, and she provides entertainment worthy of our king. The gates on the far side of the arena groaned open. Seraphine's blood turned to ice. 3 wolves emerged from the darkness, fully shifted, their eyes gleaming with feral hunger. These weren't pack wolves. These were ferals. Wolves who had lost themselves to their beasts, kept starved and savage for exactly this purpose. The crowd erupted in cheers. Seraphine scrambled backward, her chest tight with panic. She had no wolf, no claws, no fangs, no supernatural strength. She was about to be torn apart for sport, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. The first feral lunged. Seraphine threw herself sideways, feeling the rush of displaced air as massive jaws snapped shut inches from her throat. She hit the ground hard, rolled, and somehow found her feet again. The second feral circled left, the third circled right. They were hurting her, she realized with sick certainty, playing with their food. "Faster, little Omega!" someone screamed from the stands. "Make it interesting!" Seraphine's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. This was how it ended then. A lifetime of being called worthless, defective, broken, and her final moments would prove them all right. The ferals attacked as one, and something inside Seraphine shattered. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming. Her bones cracked and reformed. Her skin split and knitted back together in ways that should have been impossible. A scream tore from her throat, transforming halfway through into something else entirely. A howl. When Seraphine opened her eyes, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer, and the 3 ferals who had been charging toward her were now frozen mid-stride, their hackles raised not in aggression, but in something that looked almost like fear. She looked down at her hands. Except they weren't hands anymore. They were paws. Massive, silver-white paws tipped with obsidian claws. The arena had gone completely silent. Seraphine lifted her gaze toward the royal pavilion and saw the Alpha King on his feet, his hands gripping the iron railing, staring down at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then the ferals attacked again, and there was no more time for thought. Only instinct. Only the wolf that had been sleeping inside her finally awakening with a fury that would change everything. 3 days earlier, Seraphine had known nothing of arenas or Alpha Kings. She knew only the Thornwood Pack compound, the sprawling estate nestled in the shadow of the Ashfall Mountains where she had spent every day of her miserable existence. She knew the servants' quarters where she slept on a straw pallet. She knew the kitchens where she worked from dawn until well past midnight. She knew the dark looks and muttered insults that followed her everywhere she went. And she knew, with the certainty of someone who had been told every single day of her life, that she was worthless. Seraphine. Cook's sharp voice cut through the morning quiet. The eggs are burning. Seraphine jerked her attention back to the iron pan, quickly rescuing the scrambled eggs before they turned to charcoal. Sorry, Cook. Sorry doesn't fill bellies. Cook, a heavy-set beta named Morna, shook her head with familiar disappointment. Head in the clouds again. What's the matter with you today? Nothing was the matter. Everything was the same as it had always been. But today was Seraphine's 19th birthday, and something about that milestone felt heavier than usual. 19 years old. 19 years since her awakening ceremony had come and gone without so much as a flicker of her wolf. The only Omega in pack history who had never shifted. The Alpha wants his breakfast in the study, Morna continued. Take it up. And for Moon's sake, don't spill anything. Seraphine arranged the tray with practiced efficiency, eggs and toast and black coffee and the blood sausage that Victor Thornwood insisted on every morning. She balanced it carefully as she made her way through the compound's labyrinthine corridors, keeping her eyes down and her footsteps quiet. Invisible. That was the goal. The less Victor noticed her, the safer she was. She reached the study door and knocked twice. Enter. Seraphine slipped inside, her gaze fixed on the thick carpet as she approached the Alpha's desk. Victor Thornwood was a massive man, broad-shouldered and iron-haired, with eyes the color of frozen amber. He ruled the Thornwood Pack with an iron fist and a short temper. He was also, technically, her uncle. Not that he had ever acknowledged the relation. Set it down, Victor said without looking up from his papers. Seraphine obeyed, then stepped back toward the door. Wait. She froze, dread pooling in her stomach. Victor finally lifted his gaze, studying her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger or disgust or the usual contempt. It was something else. Something that made her skin crawl. 19 today, aren't you? Seraphine nodded, not trusting her voice. 19 years, Victor repeated slowly. 19 years I've fed and housed you out of respect for my late brother's memory. All that time you've been a drain on pack resources, a stain on our bloodline, a constant reminder of my brother's greatest shame. Seraphine's fingernails dug into her palms. She knew better than to respond. I've been patient, Victor continued. I kept hoping you might develop late, might prove yourself useful in some way. But you're a woman grown now, and you're still nothing. Still broken. Still wolfless. He rose from his chair, and Seraphine fought the urge to retreat. The Alpha King has called for this month's crucible offerings. Each pack must provide 1 Omega for the arena. Victor's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. I've decided our contribution will be you. The words didn't register at first. Seraphine heard them, but her brain refused to process their meaning. The crucible, she finally whispered. But that's... No one survives the crucible. Wolfless Omegas certainly don't, Victor agreed. But at least your death will serve a purpose. It will remind the other packs that Thornwood blood is strong enough to cull its own weaknesses. Please. The word escaped before she could stop it. Uncle, please. I'll work harder. I'll do anything. Just don't. You'll address me as Alpha Thornwood. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. And you'll go where I send you without complaint. Guards. The study door burst open, and 2 wolves in Thornwood livery seized Seraphine's arms. Take her to the holding cells, Victor ordered. The transport leaves at dawn. Seraphine struggled, panic overriding every survival instinct she had ever developed. No. No, please. I don't want to die. Please. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. As the guards dragged her from the study, Victor Thornwood had already returned to his breakfast, dismissing her from his thoughts as easily as one might dismiss a fly. The holding cells beneath the Thornwood compound were cold and dark and smelled of old fear. Seraphine huddled in the corner of her iron cage, knees drawn to her chest, trying to stop shaking. Around her, the other cells stood empty. She was the only offering this month, the only wolf pathetic enough to be sentenced to death by her own pack. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time moved strangely in the darkness. You're still awake. Seraphine's head snapped up. A figure stood outside her cell, barely visible in the torchlight from the far end of the corridor. As they stepped closer, Seraphine recognized the sharp features and honey-colored eyes of Lysara, Victor's daughter, and the pack's future alpha. Cousin? Lysara's voice dripped with false sympathy. I wanted to say goodbye. Seraphine pressed herself harder against the wall. Lysara had tormented her since they were children, finding endless creative ways to remind Seraphine of her place. This visit would be no different. Nothing to say? Lysara crouched down to Seraphine's eye level, a cruel smile playing at her lips. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You never did have much spirit. That's probably why your wolf never came. She took one look at your pathetic soul and decided you weren't worth inhabiting. The words landed like blows, each one finding the tender places Seraphine had tried so hard to protect. I used to wonder, you know, Lysara continued, why Father kept you around so long. But I think I finally understand. He was waiting for the perfect opportunity to dispose of you publicly, to make an example. She leaned closer, her breath hot against Seraphine's cheek. And I must say, the crucible is absolutely perfect. You'll die screaming in front of thousands, and everyone will remember that this is what happens to defective wolves. Seraphine's eyes burned with unshed tears. Oh, don't cry! Lysara's tone sharpened with irritation. At least try to die with some dignity, though I suppose that's too much to ask from someone like you. She rose gracefully and turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. I had the guards search your quarters. Found that little journal you've been keeping? All those pathetic scribblings about wishing you were someone else, dreaming about escaping. Lysara's smile widened. I burned it, every page. Thought you should know that nothing of you will remain after tomorrow, not even your fantasies. She swept away, her laughter echoing through the empty cells. Seraphine pressed her face against her knees and wept silently. The journal had been the only thing that was truly hers, the only place where she could pretend to be brave, where she could imagine a life beyond these walls. And now it was ash, just like she would be soon. Sometime before dawn, the guards came. They bound her wrists with silver-laced rope that burned against her skin and dragged her to a covered wagon waiting in the compound's rear courtyard. No one came to see her off. No one offered a final word of comfort or farewell. She was loaded into the wagon like cargo, and the door slammed shut behind her. Through a crack in the wooden slats, Seraphine watched the Thornwood compound grow smaller and smaller as the wagon began its 3-day journey toward the capital, toward the arena, toward her death. She should have felt terror. She should have been paralyzed with fear. Instead, as the compound finally disappeared beyond the horizon, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not hope exactly, because hope was for wolves who had something to live for. It was more like defiance, a small stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. If she was going to die, she decided, she would not die crying. She would not give Victor or Lysara or any of them the satisfaction. She would die standing. The capital city of Valdrin sprawled across the banks of the Silver Run River like a great stone beast, its towers clawing at the sky. Seraphine saw it first through the cracks in the wagon walls, glimpses of crowded streets and soaring architecture so different from the isolated compound where she had spent her entire life. The air here smelled of smoke and spice, and something else. Something electric that made her skin prickle. Power. The air smelled of power. The wagon rumbled through the city gates and wound through increasingly narrow streets before finally stopping in a cobblestone courtyard. When the door opened, Seraphine found herself staring at the massive obsidian walls of the crucible. "Out!" the guard ordered. She climbed down on unsteady legs, her body aching from 3 days of jolting travel. Other wagons filled the courtyard, disgorging their own offerings. Seraphine counted 7 other wolves, all of them thin and frightened and bearing the same silver-laced bindings she wore. So she wasn't the only unwanted Omega in the 5 kingdoms. Somehow, that made it worse. "Move!" the guards barked, herding them through a side entrance and down a long corridor lit by flickering torches. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the smell of old blood and fresh fear. They emerged into a holding area beneath the arena floor, a circular chamber ringed with iron cages. Seraphine was shoved into the nearest one, the door clanging shut behind her with terrible finality. "You have 1 hour," a guard announced to the group. "Then the crucible begins. First trial is the hunt. Survive until sunset, and you earn the right to live packless. Fail, and you feed the ferals." He walked away, leaving them in suffocating silence. Seraphine gripped the bars of her cage and forced herself to breathe. 1 hour. 1 hour until she faced certain death. It's not so bad, really. She turned to find a young woman in the adjacent cage watching her with hollow eyes. The stranger was rail-thin, with matted auburn hair and fresh bruises mottling her pale skin. "The dying, I mean," the woman continued. "I've heard it's quick, once they get you. The ferals go for the throat first." Seraphine's stomach lurched. "I'm Neve," the woman said, "from the Ironholt pack. What about you?" "Seraphine? Thornwood." Neve's eyebrows rose. "Thornwood? But that's one of the strongest packs in the kingdom. Why would they send someone to the crucible?" "Because I can't shift." The admission scraped like broken glass in her throat. "My wolf never came." Something flickered in Neve's expression. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "Neither did mine," Neve said quietly. "My awakening came and went without so much as a twitch. They called me hollow, said I was born without a beast." Seraphine stared at her. She had never met another wolf less Omega, had never known they existed beyond the walls of her own isolation. "There are more of us than they want to admit," Neve continued, reading her expression. "The packs keep it quiet. It's shameful, you see. A wolf-less wolf, a contradiction that shouldn't exist." She laughed bitterly. "But we do exist, and they send us here to be erased." "If we survive," Seraphine said slowly, "where would you go?" Neve's hollow eyes flickered with something almost like hope. "There are rumors of a sanctuary in the northern mountains, a place where the broken wolves gather, where no one cares if you can shift or not." She shrugged. "Probably just a myth, but it's nice to dream." Before Seraphine could respond, the horn sounded above them, 3 notes deep and resonant, and the chamber erupted into chaos as the guards began dragging the offerings toward the arena floor. Seraphine's hour was up. The crucible had begun. Seraphine remembered fragments of what happened next, the blinding sunlight as she was shoved through the arena gates, the roar of the crowd, hungry and merciless, the 3 pharaohs emerging from the shadows, their eyes empty of everything but hunger. And then the pain. The impossible, shattering pain of bones breaking and reforming, of muscles tearing themselves apart only to rebuild stronger, the scream that became a howl, the world suddenly sharper, brighter, more real than anything she had ever experienced. She remembered fighting, claws and fangs and instincts she didn't know she possessed. She remembered the taste of blood that wasn't her own. She remembered the pharaohs retreating, whimpering, and submitting to something in her that commanded their obedience. And she remembered the silence. 10,000 voices, struck mute by the impossible thing they had just witnessed. When Seraphine finally collapsed, her body shifting back to human form without her permission, she lay naked and trembling in the blood-stained sand, too exhausted to even cover herself. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured, accompanied by the swish of a cloak against stone. Remarkable. The voice was deep and rich, carrying an authority that made something in Seraphine's chest tighten. She forced her eyes open and found herself staring at boots. Black leather, polished to a mirror shine, inches from her face. Her gaze traveled upward, past legs clad in dark trousers, past a broad chest covered in crimson silk, past shoulders wide enough to block out the sun, to a face that stopped her breath. The Alpha King was younger than she had expected. Late 20s, perhaps, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could have been carved from marble. His hair was black as midnight, swept back from a face that balanced brutal beauty with cold calculation. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were silver. Not gray, not pale blue, but pure, polished silver, like moonlight given form. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. She shifted, someone was saying. An advisor, maybe, hovering nervously at the king's shoulder. "Your Majesty, that's impossible. She was registered as wolfless." The Thornwood Alpha himself confirmed, "I saw what happened." The king's voice cut through the babbling like a blade. He crouched down, bringing himself to Seraphine's level, and she fought the urge to shrink away. Up close, he smelled like pine forests after rain, wild and intoxicating, with something deeper beneath, something dangerous that made her newly awakened wolf whine with confused recognition. "What is your name?" he asked. Seraphine's throat worked, but no sound emerged. The king's moonlit eyes narrowed slightly. Then, before she could react, he reached out and touched her face. Just his fingertips against her cheek, light as a breath. Fire exploded through her veins. Seraphine gasped, her back arching as sensation overwhelmed her. It wasn't pain exactly, but it was too intense to be pleasure. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like recognition, like her wolf had just encountered something it had been searching for its entire existence. The king's expression flickered. Surprise, quickly masked. His hand withdrew, and the fire faded to a persistent warmth that hummed beneath her skin. "Interesting," he murmured, so quietly she barely heard him. Then he rose and his voice returned to its commanding volume. "This one comes with me. Prepare a chamber in the East Wing." "Your Majesty?" The advisor sounded scandalized. "She's an Omega, a crucible offering. The law states that any wolf who survives the hunt until sunset earns the right to live." The king's tone brooked no argument. "She survived. She lives. And she does so under my protection." He turned and strode away, his crimson cloak billowing behind him. Seraphine lay in the sand, her mind reeling, as servants rushed forward to cover her with blankets and lift her onto a stretcher. What just happened? The question echoed through her skull as they carried her from the arena, past the stunned crowd, through corridors of gleaming stone until the sounds of the crucible faded to nothing. She was alive. Against every odd, against every expectation, she was alive. And the Alpha King himself had claimed her. Seraphine woke in a bed softer than clouds. For a long moment she simply lay there, convinced she was dreaming. The sheets beneath her were silk. The canopy above her was embroidered with silver thread. Sunlight streamed through windows of actual glass, casting rainbows across walls painted the color of sea foam. This was not the servants' quarters. This was not even close to anything she had ever experienced. She sat up slowly, her body protesting with a chorus of aches. The blankets fell away, revealing a simple white shift that someone must have dressed her in while she slept. Her arms were bare, and she could see the faint silver scars where the feral's claws had caught her before she turned the tide. "You're awake." Seraphine's head snapped toward the voice. An elderly woman sat in a chair by the window, hands folded in her lap, watching her with sharp, dark eyes. "I am Valara," the woman said, "chief healer of the royal household. How do you feel?" Seraphine opened her mouth, then closed it. How did she feel? Confused, terrified, like her entire world had been upended and she had no idea which way was up. "Sore," she finally managed. Valara's lips twitched. "That's to be expected. A first shift is always traumatic even when it happens at the proper age. Yours was many years overdue. Your body is still adjusting." "My wolf?" Seraphine whispered. "She's really there? It wasn't just—" "She's there." Valara rose and crossed to the bed, pressing cool fingers to Seraphine's forehead. "Dormant again, for now, but very much present. I've never seen anything quite like it." "Like what?" The healer hesitated, something flickering in her expression. "Your wolf is unusual. Her energy signature is unlike any I've encountered in 60 years of practice. The king noticed it too, which is why you're here instead of in the common survivor's barracks." Seraphine's pulse quickened. "The king. He touched me, in the arena. Something happened." "Yes." Valara's voice was carefully neutral. "Something did." "What? What happened?" Before the healer could answer, the chamber door swung open. Seraphine's stomach flipped as the Alpha King strode in, every bit as overwhelming as he had been in the arena. He had changed from his formal attire into simpler clothes, dark trousers and a loose white shirt that somehow made him look even more dangerous. "Leave us," he said to Valara. The healer bowed and departed without a word, closing the door behind her. Seraphine was alone with the Alpha King. She should have been terrified. Every instinct she had developed over a lifetime of survival screamed at her to look away, to submit, and to make herself as small and unthreatening as possible. Instead, she found herself meeting his silver gaze directly. Something sparked in those moonlit depths. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "You don't cower," he observed. "Should I?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Seraphine's blood ran cold with the certainty that she had just made a fatal mistake. But the king only tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Most wolves can barely stand in my presence," he said. "The weight of an Alpha King's aura is considerable. Yet you sit there and meet my eyes like an equal." "I'm not your equal." "No," he agreed. "You're not." He crossed to the window, his back to her, and Seraphine used the opportunity to study him, the breadth of his shoulders, the tension in his spine, the way his hands clasped behind his back, fingers interlocked with white-knuckled pressure. He was not as calm as he appeared. "Tell me about your awakening," he said without turning. "The one that was supposed to happen at 13. Seraphine swallowed. "There's nothing to tell. The ceremony came and went. Everyone waited for my wolf to emerge. She never did. And in the 6 years since? Nothing. No flickers, no dreams, no connection. Until today." The king turned, and his expression made her go still. "Something triggered your shift," he said. "Something specific. Wolves don't simply awaken after years of dormancy without cause." He moved closer, and Seraphine fought the urge to retreat. "What did you feel in the moment before you changed?" She thought back to the arena, the ferals lunging, the certainty of death approaching. "I felt angry," she admitted. "Not scared. Angry. That they were going to kill me without ever knowing who I really was. That I was going to die proving them all right." The king was very close now, close enough that she could smell him again. That wild, rain-soaked forest scent with its undercurrent of danger. "Defiance," he murmured. "Your wolf woke for defiance." His hand rose, and Seraphine's entire body tensed. But he only brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather-light and devastating. "Most wolves shift from fear or joy or the simple passage of time," he said. "But you shifted from pure, stubborn refusal to die quietly." Something almost like respect flickered in his silver eyes. "That's extraordinarily rare." "What does it mean?" His fingers traced down her temple, along her jaw, coming to rest at the pulse point in her throat. Seraphine felt her heartbeat stutter beneath his touch. "It means," he said softly, "that you're not what anyone thought you were. And I intend to find out exactly what you are." He withdrew, and the loss of contact left her strangely bereft. "Rest," he commanded, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow, your training begins." "Training?" The king paused at the threshold, glancing back over his shoulder. "You have a wolf now, little Omega. One that may be more powerful than anyone realizes." His smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm going to teach you how to use her." The door closed behind him, and Seraphine was left alone with her swirling thoughts and the phantom warmth of his touch still burning against her skin. 3 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and discovery. True to his word, the Alpha King oversaw Seraphine's training personally. Every morning at dawn, she reported to the palace's private training grounds, where Kaelin Blackmore put her through exercises designed to strengthen her connection with her wolf. It was brutal work. "Again," Kaelin commanded, circling her as she struggled to hold the half-shift. Claws extended, fangs descended, eyes blazing with inner fire, but unable to complete the full transformation. Seraphine's muscles screamed in protest. Sweat dripped down her spine, soaking through the simple training clothes they had given her. "I can't," she gasped. "You can." His voice left no room for argument. "Your wolf is there. I can feel her. Stop fighting her and let her through." "I'm not fighting her." "You are." He moved behind her, and suddenly his hands were on her shoulders, his chest pressed against her back. The contact sent electricity racing through her veins. "You've spent your whole life believing you were broken. Part of you still believes it. That part is keeping her caged." Seraphine's breath came in ragged pants. His proximity was doing things to her concentration that had nothing to do with training. "Focus," Kaelin murmured against her ear. "Feel where our energies meet. Feel how your wolf responds to mine." She closed her eyes and tried to do as he instructed. And there, beneath the chaos of sensation, she found it. A thread of connection between his alpha essence and something deep inside her. When she pulled on that thread, her wolf surged forward. The shift completed in a rush of pain and power. Seraphine stood on 4 legs, silver-white fur gleaming in the morning light, and for the first time since the arena, she felt whole. "Good. Kalen's voice held genuine approval. He had stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left her lupine form. Very good. Now hold it. She held it for nearly an hour before exhaustion forced her back to human form. That night, as she soaked her aching muscles in the copper tub in her chambers, Seraphine reflected on how much had changed. She had a wolf, a real powerful wolf that grew stronger with each passing day. She had a place, however uncertain, in the royal household. And she had something else. Something she didn't dare name that happened whenever the Alpha King touched her, or stood too close, or looked at her with those impossible silver eyes. A knock at her chamber door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, quickly wrapping herself in a robe. But it wasn't Valara or one of the servants who stepped inside. It was Kalen. Seraphine's chest tightened. He had never come to her chambers before. Their interactions had been confined strictly to the training grounds, professional despite the intensity that crackled between them. "Your Majesty," she managed, very aware that she was dripping wet and wearing nothing but a thin robe. His silver gaze swept over her, then deliberately fixed on her face. "We need to talk." His voice was different tonight. Rougher, almost strained. "About what's happening between us." Seraphine's breath caught. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me." He moved closer, and she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. "You feel it too. This pull. This need to be close that has nothing to do with training and everything to do with something neither of us asked for." She couldn't deny it. The bond, or whatever it was, had been growing stronger every day. She dreamed of him now, woke reaching for him, found herself counting the hours until their next training session. "What is it?" she whispered. Kalen's expression was anguished. "It's a mate bond, or the beginning of one." The words hit her like a physical blow. Mate bond. The sacred connection between destined pairs, the union that wolves spent lifetimes searching for. It was supposed to be rare, beautiful, something celebrated. So why did he look like he was in pain? "That's impossible," she said. "I'm an Omega. A former wolf? Less Omega. And you're the Alpha King. We can't be. I know what we can't be." His voice cracked with frustration. "I've told myself that every single day since the arena, but the bond doesn't care about politics or propriety or the dozens of noble-born she-wolves who have been presented to me as potential queens." He was pacing now, agitation rolling off him in waves. "When I touched you in the arena, I felt it. The recognition. The click of two souls finally finding each other." He laughed bitterly. "Do you know how long I've searched for my mate? Since I came of age. Year after year of hoping every new face would be the one. And then I find her in the most impossible candidate imaginable." Seraphine's legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. "So what happens now?" she asked. Kalen stopped pacing. He stood before her, close enough to touch, but carefully maintaining distance. "Nothing," he said, and the word was filled with pain. "Nothing can happen. A king cannot take an Omega as his queen. The nobles would revolt. The other packs would see it as weakness. Everything I've built to maintain peace among the 5 kingdoms would crumble." "Then why are you telling me this?" His silver eyes found hers, and she saw centuries of loneliness in their depths. "Because you deserve to know. Because the bond is going to get stronger, and you're going to feel things you don't understand, and I won't have you thinking you're going mad." He reached out, his fingertips brushing her cheek with devastating tenderness. "And because if I can't have you, I at least wanted you to know that you are wanted, that you were never broken or worthless or any of the things they told you. You are rare and extraordinary, Seraphine, and in another world, in a kinder world, you would already be mine." He withdrew his hand and walked toward the door. "Training continues tomorrow," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. "We have until the summit of alphas. By then, I need you strong enough to control your wolf completely." "Why? What happens at the summit?" Kaelin paused at the threshold. "The noble she-wolves are being presented. I have until the summit to choose a queen." His back was rigid with tension. "And once I do, the mate bond between us will begin to break. It will be painful for both of us, but it's the only way." He left without looking back. Seraphine sat in the gathering darkness, feeling something deep within her beginning to crack. She had finally found where she belonged, and she was about to lose it all over again. The summit of alphas arrived with all the grandeur and poison of a venomous flower. Seraphine watched from the shadows of the great hall as noble families from across the 5 kingdoms paraded their daughters before the Alpha King's throne. Each she-wolf was more beautiful than the last, draped in silks and jewels, their wolves radiating power and breeding, and Kaelin sat through it all with a face carved from stone. The week since his confession had been torture. Continued training, carefully maintained distance, stolen glances that said everything words could not. The mate bond had grown stronger despite their efforts to starve it, a constant ache in Seraphine's chest that flared to agony whenever she saw him with another woman. Tonight, he would choose his queen. Tonight, their bond would begin to die. "You shouldn't be here." Seraphine turned to find Valara beside her, the old healer's face creased with concern. "I couldn't stay away," Seraphine admitted. "I needed to see." "Needed to torture yourself, you mean?" Valara's voice was gentle despite her words. "Child, this will only make it harder. It's already impossible." Seraphine's gaze returned to the throne, where a raven-haired beauty was currently curtsying before Kaelin. "At least this way, I'll have closure. I'll watch him choose, and then I'll leave. Find that sanctuary Neve told me about. Start fresh somewhere far from here." The music swelled as another candidate took her turn. This one a golden-haired alpha daughter whose wolf practically glowed with dominance. Seraphine's wolf stirred restlessly, a low growl building in her chest. "Mine," the beast snarled. "He is mine." Seraphine pressed her hand to her heart, trying to quiet the possessive fury. "Hush," she whispered. "He was never ours to keep." But the wolf would not be silenced. Something was wrong, something beyond the normal pain of watching their mate slip away. Her beast was agitated in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy. "Danger," her wolf insisted. "Danger here, danger now." Seraphine scanned the great hall with new eyes, the noble families, the servants, the guards stationed at every door. Everything looked exactly as it should for a royal summit. And yet, there, in the corner near the musicians, a man in servant's livery whose posture was all wrong, too tense, too watchful. And there, by the wine table, a woman whose eyes kept darting to the throne with barely concealed malice. And there, approaching the Alpha King with a golden goblet in her hands, the raven-haired beauty from earlier. Seraphine's wolf exploded inside her skull with a single word. Poison. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't consider the consequences. She simply moved. Seraphine burst from the shadows, her wolf surging to the surface as she sprinted across the great hall. Gasps and screams erupted around her, but she heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the goblet in the raven-haired woman's hands and the distance still separating it from Kaelin's lips. "No!" She collided with the woman just as the goblet reached the king's fingers. Wine splashed across the marble floor, sizzling where it landed, eating through stone like acid. The great hall erupted into chaos. Guards swarmed forward, nobles screamed and fled. The raven-haired woman twisted in Seraphine's grip, her face contorting with rage as she abandoned all pretense. You ruined everything, the woman snarled, and her voice was wrong, layered with something dark and ancient. Years of planning, years of waiting for the right moment, and you pathetic little creature, you dare interfere. She threw Seraphine off with supernatural strength. Seraphine hit the floor hard, but she was already shifting, her wolf exploding from her skin in a burst of silver-white fury. Around her, she heard other wolves emerging, guards and nobles alike responding to the threat. But the raven-haired woman was changing too. Her shift was nothing like any Seraphine had witnessed. It was wrong, twisted, bones cracking in directions they shouldn't, skin splitting to reveal not fur, but something scaled and smoking. When the transformation completed, the creature that stood before them was no wolf. It was something else entirely. Something from Nightmare. Skinwalker. Valara breathed from somewhere behind Seraphine. Moon preserve us. It's a skinwalker. The creature lunged for Kaelin. Seraphine intercepted it. The collision was catastrophic. Claws raked across her flank. Fangs snapped inches from her throat. Pain exploded through her body as the skinwalker's poison touch burned wherever it made contact. But she held her ground. You will not touch him, her wolf snarled. He is ours. She fought with everything she had, every ounce of training Kaelin had given her, every drop of defiant fury that had awakened her wolf in the first place. The skinwalker was stronger, faster, more experienced, but Seraphine had something it lacked. She had something worth dying for. A massive black wolf slammed into the skinwalker from the side, ripping it away from Seraphine. Kaelin. His wolf form was enormous, twice the size of any normal alpha, with eyes that blazed pure molten silver. Together, they fought. It was as if they had been battling side by side for centuries. Every move Seraphine made, Kaelin complimented. Every opening she created, he exploited. Their wolves moved in perfect synchronization, the mate bond singing between them like a war drum. The skinwalker shrieked as Kaelin's jaws closed around its throat. Seraphine's fangs found its heart. The creature convulsed once, twice, then crumbled to ash. Silence descended on the great hall. Seraphine's shift dissolved, leaving her human and naked and covered in wounds that burned with residual poison. She collapsed to her knees, gasping as agony radiated through her body. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Kaelin, human again, cradled her against his chest. His face was pale with terror, his silver eyes wild as they catalogued her injuries. "Valara!" he roared. "Now!" "The poison!" Seraphine managed through chattering teeth. "It burns." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know. Just hold on. Stay with me." "You are going to choose a queen tonight." She laughed weakly, blood bubbling at her lips. "Sorry I ruined your summit." "Damn the summit." He pressed his forehead to hers, his tears falling hot against her cheeks. "Damn the throne and the nobles and every law that says I cannot have you. You just saved my life. You almost died for me." "Would do it again," she whispered. "Would do it 1,000 times." Kaelin made a sound that was half sob, half growl. "Then let me save yours." Before she could ask what he meant, his mouth found the curve of her neck, right where her pulse fluttered weakly beneath the skin. And he bit down. Pain and pleasure exploded through her simultaneously. She felt the mate bond, that fragile thread between them, suddenly blaze into an unbreakable chain. His essence poured into her, flooding her veins, burning away the skinwalker's poison and replacing it with something pure and powerful. She felt his emotions crash into her consciousness, fear and love and desperate hope. She felt his wolf recognize hers, not as a subordinate omega, but as an equal, as the other half of his very soul. And she felt herself healing, wounds closing, strength returning, as the claiming bite rewrote her very existence. When Kalen finally lifted his head, his mouth stained with her blood, the great hall had gone deathly silent. Every alpha, every noble, and every servant stood witness to what their king had just done. He had claimed a former wolf less Omega as his mate, publicly, irrevocably, in direct defiance of every tradition and expectation. Seraphine stared up at him, her chest swelling with the force of their newly completed bond. "You just destroyed your political alliances," she breathed. "I just saved the only thing that matters." He helped her to her feet, keeping one arm firmly around her waist. Then he turned to face the stunned assembly. "Anyone who has objections," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the hall with deadly calm, "is welcome to challenge me for the throne. Right now." No one moved. No one dared. Kalen's lips curved into a smile that was all wolf. "Then kneel before your queen." One by one, the alphas of the 5 kingdoms lowered themselves to the ground. Seraphine watched in disbelief as the most powerful wolves in the realm bowed their heads to her, the unwanted Omega, who had never been supposed to amount to anything. "I told you," her wolf purred with smug satisfaction. "I told you he was ours." Seraphine turned to Kalen, finding his silver gaze already fixed on her with an intensity that made her toes curl. "What happens now?" she asked. He cupped her face in his hands, brushing his thumbs across her cheekbones with reverent tenderness. "Now we rule together. Now I spend the rest of my very long life making sure you never doubt your worth again." His forehead pressed against hers. "Now you let me love you the way I've been dying to since the moment I saw you standing in that arena, refusing to break." Seraphine rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The great hall erupted in cheers, but she barely heard them. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment. This man, this impossible future she had never dared to dream of. She had walked into the crucible expecting to die. Instead, she had found her wolf, her mate, and her throne. She had found exactly where she belonged. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. A big thank you to everyone who's following. Your support truly means the world to me.